Welcome to The Explainer. All right, today we are diving headfirst into one of the most transformative and, frankly, world-shattering periods in all of human history, a time when the map as we know it was literally redrawn. I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? How did these relatively small kingdoms, kind of tucked away on the edge of Europe, suddenly project their power across these vast, terrifying oceans? How did they connect entire hemispheres that had been totally separate for thousands of years? Let's get into it. You've probably heard this phrase before, right? God, gold, and glory. And honestly, there's a good reason it's so famous. These three forces, deep religious conviction, a powerful hunger for wealth, and this intense national pride, they were the rocket fuel for this whole era of exploration. Okay, so to really get why this all kicked off right around the mid-1400s, we need to look at the world map, or maybe more importantly, the economic map as Europeans saw it back then. Think of it like a giant bottleneck, a traffic jam for trade. If you were a king in Portugal or a merchant in England and you wanted spices or silk from the East, you had one option: buy it from Italian middlemen. They controlled the trade routes, and they jacked up the prices like crazy. So pretty quickly, everyone else in Europe started asking, there's got to be another way, right? So you've got the motivation, find a way around the Italians and their high prices. But what was the actual spark? What gave these kingdoms the final push to pour tons of money into these incredibly dangerous, totally uncertain voyages into the unknown? Well, it was that powerful cocktail of God, gold, and glory. See how they all work together? Spreading Christianity gave a holy justification for the whole thing. That mission, in turn, brought glory and bragging rights over your rivals. And what paid for the ships and the soldiers to do it all? Gold. Lots and lots of gold. And you gotta understand, this wasn't just some chaotic grab for cash. No, it was a full-blown national economic strategy called mercantilism. The core idea was pretty simple and pretty brutal. There's a limited amount of wealth in the world, kind of like a pizza with a fixed number of slices. To be the most powerful, your nation needs to get the biggest piece of that pizza, and you do that by hoarding gold and silver. So this became the playbook. Step 1, go out and grab some colonies because they have all the cheap raw materials. Step 2, bring those materials back home and manufacture finished goods. And Step 3, the kicker, sell those goods to your rivals for more than you buy from them. It creates this perfect loop designed to make the home country incredibly rich and powerful. But, having a great plan is one thing. You actually need the tools to pull it off. And for centuries, they just didn't exist. But then, a real game changer came along. New ships, like the Caravel. They were fast, they were nimble, and crucially, they could sail against the wind. All of a sudden, these ambitious plans weren't just dreams anymore. All right, first up in this race, Portugal. A pretty small country, really. They were basically boxed in by their much bigger neighbor, Spain. So for them, the only way to expand, the only way to get in on the action, was to head out to sea. And what's amazing about Portugal is how methodical they were. This wasn't a lucky shot in the dark. For decades, they just kept pushing, inch by inch, down the coast of Africa. Each voyage learned from the last, mapping the winds, the currents, until finally, in 1498, Vasco da Gama made it all the way around Africa and reached India. Boom, the Italian monopoly was broken. Now, Portugal was too small to conquer massive countries, so they got clever. They created what's called a trading post empire. They used their powerful navy to capture and control strategic ports all along the sea route to Asia. It was like setting up a bunch of armed toll booths on the ocean, allowing them to control the entire spice trade. Okay, so while Portugal is painstakingly making its way east, its rival, Spain, decides to try something completely different. A huge, frankly wild gamble. Yeah, backed by the Spanish crown, this guy, Christopher Columbus, sails west convinced he's going to find a shortcut to Asia. Spoiler alert. He was way off. But what he and the explorers who came after him did find would change everything. They stumbled upon the Aztec and Inca empires, civilizations loaded with the one thing every European monarch was desperate for: gold and silver.
And if you want a sense of the sheer audacity of this era, look no further than this treaty. Just 2 years after Columbus's voyage, Spain and Portugal basically sat down with the Pope and drew a line down the middle of the globe. Seriously, they agreed that everything to the west of the line was Spain's for the taking, and everything to the east was Portugal's. Just incredible.
Of course, they weren't going to have this giant new world all to themselves for long. Other big players in Europe were watching all this gold and silver pour into Spain and Portugal, and they wanted a piece of the pie. So in come the new kids on the block, the French, the Dutch, and the English. They knew the southern routes were already locked down, so they became obsessed with finding their own shortcut to Asia, a legendary northwest passage through the icy waters of the Arctic. And that quest is what led them straight to North America. Now, even though they were all looking for that same passage, they each ended up with totally different colonial models. The French built their colony around the fur trade, which meant smaller settlements and actually working with Native American tribes. The Dutch, they were all about business. They built New Amsterdam, which you might know as New York City, as a pure hub for global trade. And then there was England, which went for a strategy of mass settlement, sending tons and tons of people to farm the land. And when I say mass settlement, I mean it. Just look at this number. By 1750, there were 1 million settlers in the English colonies. This wasn't just a trading operation, it was a demographic tidal wave. Now, compare that 1 million to New France. In the same year, its population was only 70,000. And that's not a failure on France's part. Their fur trapping economy just didn't need huge numbers of people. But this huge difference in strategy would have massive consequences down the line. So, after centuries of all this competition, this conquest, this colonization, what was the result? Well, simply put, the world was remade. We got a new global map, a new global economy, but it came at a truly staggering human cost. And to really understand the mindset, you just have to read their own words. This is from Christopher Columbus's personal journal, right after his first encounter with the indigenous people here. It's chilling. It shows a view of the world where new peoples weren't seen as equals, but as resources to be controlled. And that mindset had absolutely devastating consequences. For indigenous populations across the globe, the arrival of Europeans brought waves of new diseases they had no immunity to, brutal warfare, enslavement, and in many cases, outright genocide. This was not a peaceful discovery. So here's the thing. The legacy of this era is, well, it's everywhere. It created the global trade networks, the political boundaries, the cultural connections that define the world we live in right now. But that world was built on a foundation of conquest and exploitation. And that leaves us with a really tough question, one that historians still grapple with today. How do we weigh the creation of our modern interconnected world against the immense suffering it caused? That's definitely something to think about. Thanks for watching.